Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
How
Are
are you?
we
It's good to
online?
be back. Yeah, we are. We're live right
Yeah, we
now,
are.
so we're recording.
So it's nice to see you again
It's
for
nice
the
to see you
second
as well. Likewise,
second
yeah.
podcast.
So,
Occidentalists.
right, the Occidentalist part
Yeah.
two. So it's a
Uh,
thing now, and
Can, can you can we start with explaining what that means? What we mean by
right,
that?
and I've got my Occidental chai here to make it
Oh
nice.
man, that's
So
cool.
we talk a lot about Orientalism, but the opposite of Orientalism is Occidentalism. So that means when people in the East create tropes about the West, which for those of us who've been to the East, lived in the East, are of Eastern origin, we might even do that more than Westerners do Orientalism, because we're peripheral to Westerners, but to us, the West is really everything in the world, I mean, for everyone, really.
Mm.
So we spend a lot of time talking about the West and creating theories. We have our own version of it. And there were actually a series of Occidentalist scholars in the 19th, 20th, 21st centuries. And in Iran, interestingly, at the University of Tehran, and now I know the guy actually who was helping to set it up via the internet. I've interacted with him. They have an Occidentalist Studies Center in the Qom Hausa. It's incredible.
I think that's where they got the term Gharb Zadigi, being having the West disease.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
So
like
there's this,
occidentosis. Yeah.
right, yeah. So
Mm.
there's this other side of it, this reflection that we have where we look at the West and we judge it from an
Mm.
Eastern perspective.
And
So this is
that shows up in the media too. I mean, you see it in TV shows and movies.
right, right.
Even in India, you find interesting depictions of Western people in
Incredible,
the
really.
movies. Yeah, yeah,
Wow, I
yeah.
didn't know that.
Egypt too. I mean,
It's funny when in Iranian TV shows, when a character goes in the West, I mean, it's very rare that they end up in the West, but in the couple times that I've seen it, I don't really watch them, but they just happen to be in the background. They always have this kind of like, you can tell an Iranian did this version of what's going on in the West. So we definitely have our own version, but I mean, we haven't critiqued ourselves yet. Maybe one day.
I wonder if when they show Jews and Oriental media in the East, does that count as Occidentalism? Is it kind of
If they're showing
Occidentalism?
them as like distinctly Ashkenazi, Western American Jews, I think so. Yeah, that's interesting.
Because there was a controversy recently in Kuwait about a TV show, basically a series where it depicted the lives of Jews in the GCC countries,
Really,
and
wow,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
Like
there was a lot of
expats.
controversy. No, no, Jews. I think who had come from Iraq originally, but
Oh, native one.
Arabic-speaking
So
Jews.
I've
Yeah,
met through
native
a
Jews.
friend an Iraqi Jew who was born and raised in Kuwait. But the idea was that, they just kept their religious identity more or less private. They didn't really talk about it so much to avoid
Actually,
the.
I know a Jew who studied in the British Council. The British Council is part of the soft power approach of Britain.
Right. Yeah, they have
Basically,
one
they
in
set up in different
Jordan.
countries and they teach English. And a lot. I learned a lot from there. And so we had this kid who was a bit weird. I mean, he spoke Arabic as a native language, but you could tell that he wasn't exactly part of the mainstream cultural scene, so to speak. And he said he was Christian, but I found out he was Jewish. So
Really?
a bit
So
ironic, yeah.
my dad grew up in South Tehran in the bad neighborhoods, but because he was a good student, he went to a smarter school. They just let him go for free, or something like that. And he lived in a neighborhood. Religious minorities tend to be disproportionately rich, the Jews and the Christians in most MENA countries, and that was certainly the case in Jordan that I noticed. I think in most MENA countries, in
Yeah, the
Lebanon, Syria.
Christians are yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's true.
Egypt is the one weird exception. Egypt's always an exception that the Christians are the poorer ones. I don't understand how that quite worked out. But anyway, in Iran, he had a lot of Christian and Jewish classmates. And one time he said salawat as a joke. And even the Jews said Allahumma. And he said, how did you know that? And he says, well, I live in this society too. Like I hear it, I see it. I live here. I'm also an Iranian. And he had classmates with all kinds of Hebrew and Christian Aramaic names, and I thought that was just so interesting. And he had actually been to the Israeli embassy with one of them, where the guy just not like inside it, but they were walking, and he said, "Oh, that is the embassy of Israel." He said, "I didn't know." He says, "Yeah, it's unmarked because it's kind of controversial to the religious Muslims, but yeah, we
That
go
was back in
there."
the 70s or maybe or the
Yeah, it
60s
was
or
in the
70s.
70s. He says, we go there when
Okay.
we want to go visit our cousins who migrated, because even before that stuff started, some people just ideologically wanted to go. So he says,
Mm.
yeah, when we want to go visit our cousin, we go get our papers or whatever there. So I thought that was
From
really
that
interesting.
unnamed building.
Right. Yeah. It's always an
Yeah.
unnamed building. Exactly.
Yeah.
So today
Speaking of
yeah.
speaking of Middle Eastern Jews, Have you heard of that guy called? I think he's an anthropologist or an evolutionist. He studies evolution. His name is God Saad or Saad
Yes,
God.
yes, the Lebanese guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Lebanese guy. So he's an interesting example of an Eastern Jew,
Yeah,
and I
I
think
think
he
he's
still speaks Arabic. Yeah,
yeah, he's one of the few. So usually when I encounter Jews who claim to be of Arab origins, I mean, some of them just deny the Arab origins now. They say, we were never Arabs. He's one of the few that is like, no, I'm an Arab. Like I'm Lebanese. I speak Lebanese Arabic. I eat Lebanese food. I think he might even visit Lebanon, but he's still very Arab. Like if he didn't tell me he was Jewish, I just would have thought he's like someone like my dad who just showed up at a
even his
young age.
accent is Arabic. You know,
Right, right. Whereas
and
usually the Arabized Jews tend to be like so detached from the Arab world by now for various reasons, time and culture. But I mean, he just left Lebanon in the midst of the civil war. So he left when my dad
yeah.
left Iran. So, but he was one of the few remaining, and apparently there's like a few dozen remaining now, maybe like 100 max. It's very
But
interesting.
just to mention it, I don't like his style that much.
Yeah, I know he's kind of one of those guys on the internet that styles himself as like I am the rebel against academia now.
He's very obnoxious, and
Right, right.
oftentimes his views
Yeah.
they're almost, well, they're borderline racist.
Yeah, and another thing is I noticed that most Arab world, let's just call him an exile. I don't know if he says this because he wants to be like, oh, I'm got a dangerous background, but he claims he's exiled from Lebanon, that he would have been killed if he had stayed. Although that's perfectly believable given, there was a war. I don't know how important he is. Like I don't know if he returns to Lebanon now that someone will care to mess with him. But many of these, like let's say escapees, exiles, whatever, even immigrants really from the Middle East,
Emigres, yeah.
emigres of all sorts of the Muslim world of Arab origins, they tend to really just be the most obnoxious Islamophobes. I mean, I
Mm.
interact with Chaldeans here, and most of them are great people, but some of them peddle these really annoying, really tried and old, lame conspiracy theories about Muslims, and just like, for example, we don't have a single Muslim TV show in America, but Christian Arab expats have like two or three, and Persian as well now. And some of them are called Al Hayat, Al Tariq, stuff like that, where it's just a constant 24/7 deluge of propagandizing against Muslims. And
TV
it's funny,
channels,
we
yes.
had a controversy here. I think it went to the Supreme. Yeah, it did. I wrote an essay about it in college where they wanted to build a mosque here in Sterling Heights, in a neighborhood near here. It's only a few miles. We do our shopping there actually, but it's a Christian Chaldean neighborhood. But as the Syrians started coming in, and Iraqis, they started resettling them in that neighborhood, right? And then they wanted to build a masjid because they had outgrown their little masjid. And the Chaldeans caused a fight, man. They were protesting, lawsuits, city council sit-ins. I mean, you name it. I'm not sit-ins, but protesting, all kinds of craziness. You can look it up on the internet. But they were saying, this is America, USA, USA. Some people had brought bacon to the city council.
But
I mean,
maybe considering the background of
right?
oppression,
Yeah,
it's
and
not
I
so
feel
surprising.
like it's sad because you see people who become oppressed, they get traumatized and they lash out in these weird ways. And I'm
You know
gonna be
what's really more surprising to me?
yeah,
Sorry for
no worries.
cutting there. What's more surprising to me is MENA people who immigrate to the U.S. and then they become virulent Islamophobes.
There's so many of them. There, you would be
Yeah, and I'm talking
surprised.
about people who are originally Muslims, and I don't see how that can be constructive.
It's this weird culmination of insecurity, the desire to fit in, Islamophobia. So some people, when they come here, I think I might have posted about this on Instagram, where they come here and they realize that the society dislikes Muslims, but they don't really dislike me just because I'm brown. It's mostly because I'm Muslim. If I wasn't Muslim, I mean, people used to think I was Mexican. I'm sure if I took my thobes off, that people might just go back to thinking I'm Mexican, right? So I feel like a lot of these people, when they encounter Islamophobia, instead of doing the right thing and saying, no, this is not true, like you did when you were, like 8 or 9 years old, they say, oh, you're right. No, I'm not a Muslim either. Islam's terrible. You're right. I agree. 100%, 100% with you. And they think that absolves them, that saves them. Maybe it does on a personal basis, but really they're just throwing everyone under the bus. And a Sikh,
Generally, it's a very bad tactic to disown who you are.
right, it's a really bad tactic.
It doesn't lead to any benefits in the end, because people, they can figure out who you are eventually,
Right, yeah.
and
It's
then you just you come across as a
Dude,
phony.
I've met people who claim to lie about their origins. It's really cringy. I know this one guy who worked with this lady who claimed she was Hispanic. but he was an Arab. And uh, one day, I think he just told her, like, I could have sworn you were Lebanese. Like, your name, had like a Christian name, so she could have, like, it could have convincingly been Hispanic or something. You know, sometimes Arab names, they kind of seem like they could be Latin because they end in vowels and things like that. And like, her name was like Celine something, because you know Celine, Mexicans have the name Celine as well. So
Yeah, it means moon.
right, yeah. So then he was like, "Are you sure you're not like any part Arab?" And she like confessed to him in Arabic, is like, "Ana Lebananiya,
Mm,
bas yani, bas abayin hali Mexikiya, alashan, al whatever." And I was like,
mhm.
he told me, I was like, "What the heck?
You know, a
What?"
lot of Iranians do that. I've met at
Yeah,
least
yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm
three
his.
Iranians
I'm Puerto Rican,
who,
bro. I've met them.
yeah,
The thing is, if you want to pretend to be a nationality, why pretend to be another oppressed group?
mm,
Right? They pretend to be. I met a guy who claimed to be Puerto Rican. He was Iranian. I met a guy. His name was. I don't even want to say his name because he might see this, but his name was super Persian. Like it was the Behram, Behrad,
something
Tej.
like Tahmas, for example.
Not that Persian, but like Abul Faz,
No,
something like super
no.
Irani. Like,
Carlo Tahmas.
and then he said like, "Oh, I'm Puerto Rican," and I was like, "Bro, you are not Puerto Rican. Shut up." Italian, Mexican. Reza Aslan admitted that he used to pretend he was Mexican. You
Mm.
know, and he said that shows how little I knew about America. That I thought being Mexican was better than being American. Right?
Well, you know, because if you're Mexican, at least you're cool and you have, you know, tacos and
At
you have
least
the
you can see you. You
quemadas.
have Spanish and you have like West
Yeah,
Coast culture
you're,
and stuff.
you're all about, you know, the fun.
Right, right.
Actually, I met, like I said, like maybe three Iranians. I mean, one of them, but the most successful one was the guy who was masquerading as Scottish.
What?
So that's, yeah, that's a
It's
non,
Scottish?
yeah, as a Scottish dude. There's, you know, non-oppressed group. Well, maybe, you know, they used to be oppressed by the
But
British, you know, back
he
in the
doesn't
day.
look
But
Scottish though, right? I mean, there's no
well,
way.
well, he's one of those like people who quite vague, you know, as far as the
Oh,
sort of phenotype is concerned. I mean, you could possibly entertain, you know. I mean, he had the height, the correct height, and
okay.
his hair was a bit sort of brownish, you know. But I figured out from his accent. His accent was you know,
That he's Persian.
quite Persian. Yeah, he I don't mean, you know, sort of to come across as disrespectful, but you know, there are certain aspects of the you know, the accent, or whether it's an Arabic speaker or the Persian
How
speaker.
did you know I was Iranian? How could you tell?
Specifically, there's clusters, you know. So he would go like, you know, but this is, and it's scary. It's scary. It's, you
We
know,
are going to the
it's
gas
cool.
station.
It wasn't
Then
that
we will
bad. I
fill up the
mean,
car.
yeah. So you know, because I can't sort of let you know, sleeping dogs lie, as they say. I actually went up to him. It was a great lecture. I mean, he was lecturing about you know,
Mhm,
quality in medicine and medical you know, administration and
mhm.
subjects like that. So I went to him and I said, you know, Mister, I'm not going to say his name because you know, you could tell that his name is not really. I mean, it sounds fake, right?
Mhm.
So I go up to him and I say, do you have any origin in the Middle East? And I could see his eyes, like, you know, widened like a UFO, like this, you know.
Yeah, he
So I
knew
could
that you
tell the
knew.
guy, yeah. And I said, you know, you sound slightly Iranian. I said, oh, he said, no, 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 I am Scottish. So all
No
of a sudden, you
way.
know, yeah, all of a sudden he's William Wallace. So,
I met this one guy
yeah.
who I met him in a group chat here. There's like a local Iranian Americans group chat. I thought he was a white guy who married an Iranian woman, or maybe a white professor of Iranian studies, because he typed in Persian. But his name was, again, I won't say his name, but it was something like James like Anderson. Like it was that American. Nothing could be more American than his name. And I met him in person once randomly at an event, and he was super Iranian. He was like my dad. He was in his 50s and he showed up in his 20s, and he talked like this, like Iranian, very Iranian accent. There's no way he's from America. And I was like, no one believes that you're James Anderson. Like, this is ridiculous. You know, maybe if I change my name to, I don't know, let's say Miguel Maserati, right? If I change the spelling, and maybe that would be believable. You know, if I just kind of acted like I was like from some South American country, people would buy it. No one would second guess it. But I mean, you can't dissimulate if you're that straight from that region. You know, maybe you could claim you're from the Bahamas when you were 8 or 9 years old.
I mean, there were, I mean, especially online, but there was this lady online. I'm not going to say her first name, but her last name was really super Persian. It was Ghafurian.
Afurian.
Ghafurian. And her first name was, you know, super white, Western. So I
Right,
don't
right.
know. Yeah. And she was like, And it's interesting how some of them don't even write in their native languages on the Facebook wall, but then you
Right.
find a cousin somewhere
Has
who's
to
writing,
commented in
and
Persian. Yeah.
exactly in Persian or in Arabic,
Right.
maybe the
Right. Right.
Romanized,
Right. Right.
like
It's
كيف حالك,
right. Right. It's really funny. They always get exposed. There was this one girl. There's this one comment. With everything that's happening now, and I think we could transition to that actually,
we
where
should.
someone commented. They made a page called Iranians for Black Lives, and in the comments, someone said, as people of color in America, we owe it to fellow people of color to stand in solidarity when they're getting oppressed, whatever. And someone who had her first name, she had changed it to like Amanda, but I mean, she had kept her last name. Credit to her. I mean, that's kind of really far to change the last name, but credit to her, kept it. But she said, quote, as people of color, but Iranians are white. And someone said, what do you mean we're white? She said, we're from Aryan origin. Aryan are the original white people. We are like the cousins of Germans and British people. And I wish it wasn't unethical to show her picture out. But I mean, if you looked at her face, you're like, I'm sorry, Furuzanda Khanum, you don't look 1% white. You look so
That
brown.
that fiction was invented during the Second World War.
No, right. These are just fictions, but it's such a
Yeah.
joke.
And
It's
it's
like,
a linguistic thing. People can't tell the difference between linguistic
right.
designations and racial designations.
It's like you're not white. White in America means from Europe. I'm sorry, it's
Yeah,
not a skin tone thing. That's the issue. I think
exactly.
people,
Exactly.
Iranians have told me here, but you're white. I say, yeah, my skin might be light to you,
Yeah.
but white means you're from Europe, from UK and
Even
France.
Italians were hardly considered white in the
Right, they
past.
were not considered. Oh, these papists, these Catholics are here to make this a colony of the papacy of Rome, and they have 10 kids, and they're greasy, and their food smells weird, and it's no, this is ridiculous.
White
Whiteness,
basically means Anglo in an
right.
American
It's
context,
amazing because
Anglo-Saxon.
in America, whiteness, it's like this ever expanding group,
Mm.
and I think generally that Middle Easterners, as they get more assimilated, will join the group. We're already seeing this. Middle Easterners who are half, even only one quarter Middle Eastern. It's like this group that just keeps expanding and absorbing people at the periphery. And I feel like the only group that will never get absorbed is maybe African Americans or maybe Asian people, because they look very different. But if you can even vaguely look similar, it just absorbs you. It's really interesting.
It's
But
like the Jews. I mean, the Jews have been
right, right,
absorbed into the
right. Or
whiteness,
even or
even
even
though
or
it's
even
difficult
like
to
the
see. I mean, it was
Arabs.
difficult to see Jews as whites, but now a lot of them
Right,
have
right,
become
yeah.
white.
And
Yeah.
and even Arabs are getting absorbed. I met a lot of Arabs with white first names and anglicized spellings of last names who turns out that they're like 100, even 100% Lebanese. So, and my dad actually used to defend this. There was this one politician who has a white name, but apparently he's 100% Lebanese. And his parents were just Lebanese Christians who fled the civil war. And they said, we're done with being Arab. We're just going to be white now. So, forget the Arab world. And my dad defended it. He said, if you want to like remake yourself, the world's an interesting place, but here we should
But to the
rewind
credit
and
of America, it's possible to do that.
yeah, we should rewind and then we could circle back and talk about this. So first thing
So
we want,
speaking of race,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
So
No, go
we,
ahead.
yeah. So we talked about race and we talked about America. So
Mhm.
what's going on in America right now? We have this big event.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So basically, I think what happened was we had Corona, and unlike I think Arab Middle Eastern societies, where regardless of what the people's opinions are of the situation, regardless of their political affiliations, when the government says this is for the good of the people say, okay, khalas, it's for the good of the shab or the country, and they let that go, right? We've seen this in various Middle Eastern countries where the people have been highly cooperative with the orders of their governments, right? Alhamdulillah. And that's because of the community element and the respect for stability. MENA people tend to really care about, even you, when I talk to you about stuff, they really, stability is their big concern. They don't want things to get out of control, right? Because of the big family community element, etc. And it's also part of Islam, political quietism, things like that, not interfering with the world, retracting and focusing on yourself. But in America, it's weird because even the people who are pro-government resist the government when it comes to these types of measures. So you had people saying, we don't want masks, we want to get haircuts, we want to go out. It's a conspiracy, even some people were saying. The vaccine, they're saying they
Well, the
created
conspiracy
Corona.
theories are very rife here in the Middle
Right.
East too.
That's true. They say they created Corona as an excuse to inject us all with the vaccine that's actually a tracking chip or something like that. So people were just on sharing this stuff on Facebook. And then, that with the disenfranchisement with what's going on with the political system here and the elections and Donald Trump and Joe Biden and how ridiculous. I mean, everyone knows how ridiculous that is. Then that combined with this killing, man, and everything that just happened, and the fact that there was a video and there was like a few, and then this was like the third one in a row, third racial incident, everything just kind of blew up in the face of the country. And what we're seeing is like a protest movement so widespread that I think it's the biggest since the civil rights movement itself, which is incredible. It's incredible to think about
I'm
that.
surprised that there aren't more
Really?
demonstrations in America. Well, it didn't happen earlier because a lot of black people have lost their lives.
Right. The thing is,
very unjust way.
Yesterday
And the police are just out of control. I mean,
no, they're totally out of control. They're militarized. A lot of times, the equipment that was left over from times of war would just get donated to police departments. So you see police departments rolling around with Humvees, some of them light armored tanks, with the weapons of war, AR-15s, shields. They look. If you look at the pictures of them, they look exactly like the people deployed to the Middle East and stuff. They're the exact same thing. And one thing that my friend pointed out, Hamza, in the live yesterday, is that there's so many unarmed black men, not men, just unarmed black men killed in America. There's one a day approximately. So we would have a constant refresh of this if we cared. What ended up happening, though, is a couple things. There was a really good video this time. Usually there's no video or the video is bad quality. This video wasn't shaky. It wasn't up and down. It was really clear. This was really gruesome because it was 9 minutes of suffocation. You could hear him begging. It wasn't like, oh, one rogue guy pulled the trigger. And there was 3 other cops there. So many things culminating to say this was evil. The other cops didn't stop it. It's very obvious to us. Plus, everyone's at home. Everyone's agitated. Everyone's poor and upset about that. Plus, the Amy Cooper thing, the park thing. Plus, the Ahmed Arbery thing. Plus, Trump, coming out and saying things to egg on the crowd when the looting starts, the shooting starts, things like that. So, I mean, everyone's just like, all right, we have enough of this. And Americans,
there's a black man who's famous for saying that there's no systemic racism in America. His name is Larry Elder. I don't know.
Right, I've seen him. Yeah.
Yeah, he has his own show and
he's
podcast.
Based in Los Angeles, I think.
Exactly. And I was interested because I saw him for the first time on Rubin. What's his name?
Yeah.
Rubin.
David Rubin.
Show.
Yeah, the Rubin Report.
The Rubin Report. So I was interested to see what he thought about all this. So I went to his Twitter feed. And he's not repentant. I thought that maybe he would, sort of admit that there was something wrong. I mean, if it was just individual, things that like in individual situations or individual judgments, individual mistakes, then would it be so widespread? I mean, you can tell there's a systemic issue here, and but this guy, I mean, even though he's black, he's just referring all the time to the issues within the black community, which do exist. I mean, it's not like, I don't think there's a perfect community, right? I mean, all communities have certain issues that they deal with, but in a lot of cases, you can tell it's just not simply these people not complying with the police.
Right, yeah.
Being disrespectful, it's more than that.
A lot of times these black conservatives, they get pushed into a pigeonhole because it's uncomfortable to be a black conservative, not defending, ostracizing them from the black community, but that just happens to them. So they get more and more defensive about it. And then they get pulled into this conservative circle that's mostly white. So they feel the need to back up their position and reaffirm themselves. And also they get a lot of positive energy from white people saying, look, a black man said it. We didn't say it. A black man said it. So then they get a lot of support just for the sake of being black. So they end up in this kind of like, in the black community, they have various terms. I'm not going to repeat them. Don't know how correct it is to repeat those words, but they have certain terms for black people who kind of go on the other side, and they always get ostracized. It's not a fun position to be in. I noticed that black conservatives, they have some decent critiques of the black community and things that could be done. But a lot of times I feel like they're falling on deaf ears. They're critiques that the white community says, hey, look, see, a black person said that you have problems. We didn't say it. It's not like the black person saying, okay, Mr. Elder, tell us what's next, and then we'll fix this issue.
In that situation, it's really difficult to, to be, to choose the middle road. I mean, if you hold back, you won't prove your conservative credentials, and then the other black people are going to be angry. But like I said, I do think he has some points, but it's sort of an unrepentant tone where it's always the black person who's there's a bit of
self-hatred there. And these
Probably, yeah.
guys are all like in their 60s. They grew up in the era where the black community was actually pretty conservative, and they grew up in the civil rights era. So to them, they see, like it's like a boomer meme. They see these new black kids as ungrateful or whatever. And another issue is, have you seen Majid Nawaz's stuff? He's kind of faded into irrelevance. He used to be more relevant. So
What happened to him?
he just became irrelevant. His shtick got old. You can only do the same shtick.
Maybe he got a sort of an injection of his fame from Sam
No,
Harris
because the
at some
first few
point.
times the shtick is fun. Wow, look at his crazy background. He went to this country and that country, and then this
He
political
was in
incident
jail in
happens.
Egypt, and
And
he
he was
speaks
in jail
Arabic.
and for
And
5 years
yeah,
in Egypt. And wow, he speaks with a British accent. And look, he's so intelligent. But
and
you
he's married
just
to a Jewish woman, I think.
right, yeah. And if you listen to him, he just repeats the same shtick every single time, and it just gets boring. He has the same idea. Anyway, I think Larry Elder to the black community is what Majid Nawaz is to the Muslim community, in the sense that, yeah, they're not mainstream, and yeah, maybe some of their ideas would be better implemented. It'd be good to implement them. But they end up just reaffirming the people that hate their respective community. I would be willing to bet most of Majid Nawaz's fans are Islamophobic Brits who say, see, he said it. And most of Larry Elder's, not Larry David, Larry Elder's fans are racist white people, or maybe just average white people say, see, he said it. So, and we have people like that in the Arab community too here in America. I mean, they're not as famous because it's not as hot button an issue, but you have like self-hating Arabs that make it their life to just criticize the Arab community in America. So they're
And
always
going
yeah.
yeah, going back to your to what you started it, with, I mean, to the community thing. We talked about the black community, and I think a lot of what the problem with maybe with black communities. I mean, I'm not part of that community, obviously, but from what I can tell, is the lack of, or maybe the deterioration of the family structure.
Right, yeah.
I think that's one of the main points that we have here in the MENA region. And you talked about COVID-19, and maybe
Right,
there's
right,
a
yeah.
certain there's a certain
Definitely, yeah.
trust in the local authorities, because we have a there's a different relationship here between the people and the government. There's a relationship of in many cases it's almost a nanny state. In many cases it's
Right.
almost the government is a kind of disembodied father or mother, so it's sort of parental kind of situation, which is very different from what you have in the US.
Right, yeah.
So people are, they assume or they expect the government to do what's better for the people, and because see, in the East here, we always have everything has two aspects. It's like a Janus face situation.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, people will officially say that we support the local authorities and what they're doing, to combat COVID, and I have to mention in this context, like in my own country, Bahrain, the government has done a lot of good in that respect. I mean, the response has been very positive, and they've tried to help out citizens as far as bank loans
Alhamdulillah.
are concerned, yeah, and issues like that, and helping out people in the private sector. The treatment is free,
Alhamdulillah.
all the tests are free,
Wow.
corona tests are free. So, they've done a lot and they spend a lot. I mean, that's really great. But the second thing, and that's what people expect, but it's also, surprising that whereas the people expect the government to do something about it and spend money, and they have done so, which is a good thing, the people don't always stick to the rules, to the
Right, they
the
break the
advice,
rules, yeah.
recommendations. They break quarantine, they break isolation, and this has been a big issue here. But I don't think it's as nearly an issue as it is in the US, where
Right,
people
yeah.
ideologically are opposed. It's
Definitely,
not
yeah.
just a question of negligence,
Exactly.
as it is
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, and people are ideologically opposed. So I mean, you guys in the US, you have that flag where there's a snake on it, right? And it
Don't
says
tread
"Don't
on
tread on
me.
me."
Yeah.
Yeah, and but don't tread on me is very different than saying I need a haircut. It's
Definitely,
not the
definitely,
same
yeah.
thing. I mean,
Americans have a tendency to view any action taken by the government, at least a certain part, as tyranny, and it's really amazing. I mean, some of the stuff is just for your own good, but I mean, they have to go to those restaurants, they have to get those haircuts. So some of the signs saying "Let us get haircuts." I mean, the thing is, it's really amazing the privilege of these rich people who want to do that, because it's poor working class people who are going to get dragged back to their jobs where they'll be in danger, right?
Mm.
So, I mean, even the essential workers aren't getting an extra pay or anything. Some of them are still getting paid only like $8 an hour, and they're risking their lives. So, one thing that you mentioned, it's really interesting, is the mindset of what the government and the people. So, in America, the mindset is that the government should just do as little as possible and interfere as little as possible. Whereas in
Except when it comes
MENA,
to foreign wars.
right, yeah, right. But as far
Yeah,
as
I
the
mean,
internals of
nobody,
the country,
yeah, but I mean, in the U.S., nobody thinks that invading Iraq, for example, was
yeah,
tyranny.
yeah, yeah. No,
But for
that's
some
the thing.
reason, paying taxes is a
Right.
tyranny. I don't get it.
There's a near unanimous. Actually, my friend wrote something interesting. He's a Middle Eastern doctorate student in Columbia, but he's born and raised in the Middle East. And he said that, the political diversity in Middle Eastern countries is far higher than America, and people might not believe that. And someone said, how? He said, well, in our native country, we have people who, in Iran, I'll speak for Iran, who are for the government, against the government, who are socialists, communists, Islamists, secularists, Democrats, Republicans, conservative Islamists, liberal Islamists, reformists, monarchists, every ism that exists, other than maybe libertarianism, probably exists in Iran, right? But in America, if you have you seen the political compass square? It's like a quadrant.
Yeah, yeah,
In America, Obama and Bush are like only like a few spots away from each other on that quadrant. The American political dialogue is like in the top right. It's in the authoritarian right. Even Bernie Sanders was barely in the center. If you map on European politics, America is like a Nazi level of right if you compare it to like where the Europeans are. So we have this thing in America where there's like no political diversity. Like you said, no one questions the wars, no one questions some of the baseline things. They're just fighting over small social issues, but no one really has the mindset to. That's why saying I'm a socialist in this country, it's like so controversial. They think that you want it to be like the USSR. But it reminds me, I remember I was in Iran once, and some guy said, I said, how's life going here? And he said, Bukhari, we have no high unemployment. I said, well, why is that? He says, the government won't create any jobs for us. And I thought, it's funny, an American would say, you should make a business, create your own job. So in the West, there's this mindset of you need to do it. And in the East, there's this mindset of the government should do this for its people. It's like this mindset of here, it's like the government is your dad and you like hate you have daddy issues. And in the Middle East, it's like the government is your benevolent grandpa who gives his grandkids $100
well, it's
every
been like
Friday.
that in the Middle East for the past, I would say, at least 3,000 years.
Really? You think it runs
Yeah,
that deeply?
yeah,
It's not
yeah.
just like a
I do.
post oil money thing?
No, no, it goes back, to ancient Egypt. Basically, the king used to be a god, and it's interesting. I mean, people always, there's a saying in Arabic, people have the same religion as the kings.
Right, yeah.
And
Anas al-Din mulukihim.
exactly. Yeah. So
Saadi
how would you say
Shirazi
that?
quoted it.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's like
I read it in his book. I don't know if he said it or if he quoted it, but it was in his book.
so there's this idea that the government is basically it's almost deified, if I
Really?
could
Yeah, that's
put it
true.
that
Yeah,
way.
it is.
It's
Yeah,
like some
that's
sort of a
true.
demigod, and it's interesting how people not only do people follow the religion of the kings, they also tend to behave as the god behaves.
Right.
Yeah, so this religious thing it plays a lot into, and there's this sort of collective thinking in the Middle East. So people expect, because they say that the people get the government they deserve. So people expect the
Right.
government
I
to do
believe that.
things
Yeah.
for them because they do the same things for the children. It's not, there's this trope, and we go back to this Occidentalist kind of thing. There's this trope in the Middle East that, when a kid or a son or a daughter reaches 18 in the West, they're basically kicked out by the
That is
family.
kind of true sometimes. That is kind of true
Mm.
in some circles in the West. Yeah. We're the
And
opposite. We
sort of,
stay.
it seems that people find, great delight in saying that. I mean, and some of the things you hear are really ridiculous. I mean,
Really?
about about
About the
like
Westerners?
it's like they say that the kids they have to pay for food, by the time
Oh
they're
yeah, like
15.
pay for the individual meal. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I've seen that in Western societies, there's this idea, there's this hyper documentation. So for example, in the Middle East, like we just live in our parents' home until we get married, and then once they're old, we help our parents out. Like we get them groceries and we do whatever we help. In the end, we think it all works out. Westerners are very obsessed with details. So when their kids turn 18 and get a job, they have to pay like their parents $300 a month to help with the house. It's the same concept. They just do it differently, I guess, in a way. I mean, they're still human at the end of the day. We still have the same ideas, but I think they're more obsessed with keeping tabs. So as Westerners, they keep tabs on how much they spend on their friends and then how much their friends spend on them. Versus for us, we say, khalas, khalia, like whatever, just leave it, next time you get it. So yeah, some of that is true. Like I've known Westerners who still live at home after 18, but I've also known people who were, like you mentioned, some more strict parents who kicked them out at 18. They said, go. And they think that that's tough love, that will teach them to be smarter and whatever. So I don't know.
I guess it depends on the kind of society. I mean, you couldn't
right.
survive as an 18-year-old, on your own in MENA countries.
No, yeah, you would be poor your whole life.
Exactly. It's like you need that push, you need that push from your parents. You need the
Definitely.
wasta, from your uncle. You need
Right, yeah.
something.
Yeah, you definitely do. You couldn't exist on your own. And that's why I notice in the West, as much as I disagree with their system, you see less people who are just stuck because they don't have anyone. Like you can get a job, you can get promoted, save up, maybe go to college, and then do all right. But in MENA, if you don't have anyone, like if you're just some Afghan dude living in Iran and you're a refugee, then you'll probably just be poor your whole life. And that's like a structural issue that we should try to address. And it ultimately goes back to this reliance on the family structure. Like we expect the family to do the role that the state would provide in the West, really. Like in the West, if you're poor, they give you food stamps. But in the East, if you're poor, your family helps, the masjid helps, the Hajj who's rich gives you zakat, you get some Ramadan, you go to the Husseiniya, they give you some food at the end of it, you get by. But I think ultimately, it's interesting to tie back to earlier what you said about Thomas Sowell is one of them, and also that not Larry
Thomas Sowell,
David. He's one, but then the Larry Elder guy. They both have the
economist,
same idea. Interestingly, is that they believe that the government help is what caused the decline of Black America. That into the 1900s, Black Americans were pulling each other up, but then post World War II, when these programs were put in place, they were given to Black Americans, and then that disintegrated the family society, if that makes sense. So they say, hey, if you have kids, we'll give you money and food stamps and Section 8 housing, whatever, and that encouraged irresponsibility.
So basically, women were marrying the state.
Right, yeah. So you see this even today, like of women of all races, but disproportionately Black people because they happen to be disproportionately poor. But again, anyone who's poor sees this. And like I saw this growing up. People around you when they're 18 and they have a kid, and it's actually like a boon because they get money, they get extra money from the state on their tax return, they get more money for food, they get qualified for better housing, they get qualified for loans and things like that. So and there's a siren. I wonder if something's more protests happening. But the state really does, in a way here, disincentivize. Because if you think about it, in America, having a child when you're 18 can boost you up economically if you have no prospects. In MENA, having a kid at 18 will always hurt you. Unless you're married and religious. But like out of wedlock is what I mean, So I don't know. I think the system here ultimately is set up to fail
having
them.
kids out of wedlock is one of the biggest indicators of failure in life, generally in all societies.
Yeah. It's so common.
Like one of the, especially in the West.
What is with that? It's so common.
I think it's terrible. I think maybe there's also an ideological background to this, to the feminism. It's sort of people are forgetting basic wisdoms that humanity has known for millennia. I mean, people have known this since the invention of writing. We've known this since the Akkadians, that you cannot have healthy families outside of a real family. You need real families. You need biologically related families. And I'm not saying that people who adopt are doing something wrong, but I'm saying that they're the exception.
Right. Yeah.
What is typical is that you have a family based on blood relationships, and this is what makes a society. It's one of the conditions for a society to prosper. And I mean, again, this goes back to the individualism we were talking about. The COVID-19 response in the U.S., which is different than sort of the mass collective response. Mm-hmm. Is that when you decide that everything is individualistic in a society, which it's the thing that obtains in a lot of Western societies. It's like, how do you decide what's good for society? How do you decide why you need a society? I mean, a society can't exist in a sort of ideological background. For some reason, humans need ideas behind things. They need sort of morality, so to speak, in the wider, the broadest sense of the word. And for millennia, people have always said, at least officially, that raising children is the ultimate good in society.
Right. It's the ultimate selfless act for society.
Exactly. And this is why we have society in the first place. as a place, and as an idea. This is why we have tribes in the first place. This is why cave people, cave humans existed. But then, I mean, with the rampant antinatalism and the feminism, the hookup culture in a lot of Western countries, and also this is infecting
Yeah.
non-Western countries. I wonder what alternative there is to this, because saying, well, why don't you pursue your dreams? Do everything for love and all these other vacuous ideas. That's not enough. That's not
Hmm.
enough to maintain and nurture society. And I think we're seeing this in the U.S. right now.
Right. Yeah. So I'm looking up something. If I tell you the statistic, you might not believe this. Wow. God help us. It
Go
says,
ahead.
according to the most notable changes increase in whatever this is, recent estimates show that about 40% of births in the United States occur outside of marriage, up from 28% in 1990. So that's nearly double. That's probably by now it's double. Okay, now I have to disable my ad blocker. Okay, I'll just read it from the Google preview. Can you guess what percentage of babies in my city in Detroit were born to unwed mothers?
50%?
No, it's higher.
No. 60?
81%.
81%?
Being out of wedlock, I mean, reading the statistic is shocking, but I already know this from conditioning, that being out of wedlock or from a divorced family, if you're not out of wedlock, so that's just the norm now. And especially in this community near me, especially this is a more working class area, definitely the norm. If you take the 80% that are born out of wedlock and you add in the percent of divorces, the amount of people who live in families that are intact is probably like 10%. And I can just attest to that. Outside of the Arab community, if you just look at the wider net of people and consider this 80% is counting that there's a ton of Arabs and all the Arabs are married and stuff like that. So
And
if you
this cuts through race
cuts through
and
everything, this is
religion,
just a number. It's just total births within the city.
like white people, black
White
people.
people, black people, Hispanics, whatever. I
Yeah.
bet if you took the Arabs and some of the Hispanics out, because some of the Hispanics have like the Catholic ideas, if you just took the Anglo whites and the African Americans, I bet the amount of out of wedlock births would be like 90. It would just jump up a little bit to like near, because people are not getting married anymore. People are just having, their relations before marriage, which is, it's fine, whatever, live your life. But they're having kids and they don't see that as a negative for society. This individualism, everyone thinks, oh, I'm in my bubble. I do my thing as long as I don't hurt you, this liberal idea, whatever, as long as you don't hurt others. But the thing is, having kids from single parent households hurts society. They have like a 3/4 chance of ending up in jail, kids from single parent households. And I've seen this play out in my life. And it's an amazing disadvantage economically, socially, emotionally, culturally, you name it, right? Like you said, it's an age old wisdom. Every society is
There's no way this can
independently
be healthy.
right. Every society, the way you tell something is good is that every society independently did it. For example, the bow and arrow is found in every single society, even if they didn't encounter other ones. The idea of two-parent households in almost every single society, discounting certain groups around the world, like tribes and whatever, nations, small nations, every major society. Why they're discarding this age-old wisdom, I think it's to their detriment, but why they're doing it, I don't know. So God,
I think there's a lot of factors, including ideological factors and economic factors.
I think that ultimately we'll see that the American experiment peaked. And I want to say the 1950s, because that was when America was richest, when the families were doing best, when the country was doing its best at it just emerged from a world war as a world power. But then you enter into the 60s with the hippies and the wars, and then the 70s
The
with more
sexual
hippies,
revolution too in the
right? And then
60s.
in the cultural revolution, the 70s and the wars,
No, I said the sexual revolution.
sexual revolution, and
Yeah.
then the crack era, the decline of inner cities, Generation X, which this is when you were in America, so you could definitely speak about this. Generation X is when you saw divorce rates shoot up for the first time. Those mothers who got married in the 60s, their kids grew up disaffected. Then in the 90s, you had even more and stuff. And then now we're just seeing a decline. Divorce rates increasing, out of wedlock rates increasing, depression rates increasing, suicide rates increasing, marriage rates decreasing, wages decreasing, economic stability
The opioid
decreasing.
crisis.
Right, addiction
That
increasing.
polarization, political
Right,
polarization. I
it
don't
seems
think
like every
America
single
has
bad
ever
is
been this
going up
polarized.
and
Yeah.
every good is going down. I mean, this is a different America. I'm sure if you visited now, you'd be shocked. I really am.
And what's going on in America right now with these, riots or demonstrations, whatever you want to call them, I think they're long overdue.
Right.
And but I find myself, I'm gonna ask myself, is there going to be, any influence, any effect by these demonstrations? Are they going to affect in real
Hmm.
change? And I don't see that.
You think
I don't
so?
see No, I don't see any real change happening because it's so embedded into the American, way of life. This injustice, the
Wow.
disproportionate distribution of wealth. What happened in 2008, Wall
Wow,
Street,
that's very
and
true. Yeah. It's just gotten
the rich
worse.
people, the 1%, and then you have all these, poor people at the bottom.
Destitute,
And,
completely destitute.
exactly. I mean, what happened? What happened was really a symptom. I mean, it wasn't
No,
the
you're
reason.
totally right. Trump, all this stuff, it's symptoms. And that's what people think, oh, we'll just get Trump out. We'll elect Biden. These liberals in their dreams will elect Biden as if the problem is the president. The problem is the country. It's the system, as it's everything. It's not that, like, imagine if you saw a leaf of a tree and when trees get sick, they get white color, they get weird colors. You say, oh, rip the leaf off. Chalas, it's the root. The root has got an infection, not the leaf. You're looking at the wrong thing. And I think the fact that you saying, and I think it's true that these protests will not ultimately lead to anything. It's a really bad indictment of how broken the country is. What more do they need to do? They kneeled, you were against it. They marched, they were against it. They said Black Lives Matter, you were against it. Now they're smashing things, you're against it. What more can they do? Did you see the pan picture of Washington D.C.? It looked like it was a country getting invaded. It was amazing. Trump was in a bunker. The whole country was getting burned and looted.
Looked like
What
the Hunger Games.
Right. It looked like the
Apparently,
purge.
Americans make these movies, and now the movies are
Yeah,
fulfilling
the
themselves.
art they say art imitates life, but sometimes life imitates art and people take a cue from these things. Some people are commenting it's like the purge, they get inspired, they go out. But it seems like what more can they do? Police officers, I just read 4 police officers were shot and killed or not killed, but shot in St. Louis. What more can they do? Start a civil war? I mean, what else is there that they have to do to be heard for this to be addressed? And the president, instead of showing leadership, tweets, if they're looting, they're shooting. And he staged this photo up. It was almost cartoonish, like from a movie, almost like what I'm used to seeing in my home country. He walked out of the White House with like hundreds of soldiers behind him, as if he's like some like the leader of like a South American military dictatorship, walking with hundreds of soldiers. And then he walks across the street in front of the church and across the White House and holds a Bible up and takes the picture. It's almost as if he's like, I mean, like, I don't even know what to say, almost as if he's like some cartoonish leader from centuries past who's trying to make a show of what religion he is. And it was like a strong man show, like, yeah, I still run these streets and I have God behind me. The pastor of that church actually denounced the photo hilariously.
I think the rest of the world may be shocked and also not really very surprised in equal measure. America has been going downwards for a long time, and maybe, I mean, people are realizing that America is not the power it used to be, and especially, I mean, even culturally, people used to. I mean, America was an aspirational country back in the day, but now people are seeing all that's going on, and actually, America's enemies are happy because that it just vindicates their view of America as a fake democracy.
Right. Yeah.
But like I said in our last podcast, I still think that, I mean, there's a certain greatness to the U.S., but unfortunately, the people who are there are just destroying, this sense of freedom, the creativity, the resourcefulness of the people there, the folks there. It's all
Right.
being wasted on these um, political,
Right,
issues.
right. I think that Americans, they've been fed this nationalism in their schools so much that they really think it is the greatest country and that it'll never go down. It's why they're always shocked when they travel and they find that people abroad don't really like America. They don't think highly of America or Americans, especially ones that have been there as well. They're usually, I mean, sometimes you see people, they think it's great, but they go and they get disillusioned, they come back, and then they meet American expats who they think, I come from the greatest country in the world. But
By the way, that
America's
didn't used to happen back in the 70s and 80s. People never came back.
really,
Yeah, especially in the 80s. I remember during our period, a lot of Egyptians, Palestinians,
they
other
wouldn't go back.
Arabs, they would not go back. But nowadays it's different.
Dude,
I mean, Indians never used to go back. Now
they
Indians
go
are going
back. I
back.
know. I know an Indian personally that went back, and many Indian. As I feel like as many Indians as I saw in America that were thinking about staying, at least temporarily. Usually that means permanently as well. As many were saying, no, no, no. As soon as I get my degree, I'm leaving. I'm like, you don't even want to get the citizenship. They're like, no, don't care. I'm leaving. And I'm just like, wow, dude. Even people go back to Iran. That's the amazing part. People go back to. I mean, I understand like if you're Emirati, Bahraini, Saudi, or even Turkish, you come from a country where I mean, I don't want to be mean, but like you have an outlook, you have a more decent quality of life. I'll be honest, Iran's not the greatest country to live in, but people are returning to Iran, man. Egypt, even I met a guy, some even Pakistan, people going back to countries where their quality of life is much worse, but they always say the same thing. They say, at least I have a hope for the future there that it'll improve and that I can help. Versus in America, I just see myself as just some minority wasting his time in a sinking ship.
It's interesting. So sometimes people in the West, they still think that the greatest legion in the world. So this gives them illusions. I remember once I was visiting a relative in Britain, and she was
Mm-hmm.
studying there. So we were talking with this older British gentleman. He was being nice. He wasn't really that mean, but being old and
Yeah,
maybe out of
British.
touch and British, he probably still thought that we were living in the 1920s and 1930s. So he was like, "Oh, you guys come here because it's such a beautiful, it's a great country, Britain, and then you ask for citizenship." I said, "No, we're not asking for citizenship. I'm a tourist, and this relative of mine is a student. And as soon as we finish what we're here to do, we're gonna leave.
Yeah,
We don't want to
yeah.
stay here.
Was he shocked
But
by
thank you
that?
very much." Yeah, he was shocked. I mean, in his mind, it's like people were still flocking
Right,
to
yeah.
Britain. Yeah, and people still go there. I mean, it's not
Mm-hmm.
like people don't go. They do go there.
Right,
A
yeah.
lot of folks were waiting in Calais in France, to cross over, to cross the channel. But
Right,
the point
right.
is that neither Britain nor America, and it's interesting. I mean, and Britain created the U.S. and now Britain is sort of following in the footsteps of this decline. And you can see that in the response to
Yeah.
COVID-19
Not just the response, but
and
going back to Brexit, just their hyper nationalist sentiments. It's almost the same thing as America, But the difference is they have more to lose because they're a small country that really benefits from being part of the greater mass of Europe. Whereas America, it's still big enough and robust enough to where it can kind of afford to, as we say, hartopurt in Persian, it can kick its legs up, like an animal, and we love those in the Persian language, an animal analogy. It can still afford to do that, whereas the UK, as we're seeing with Brexit, really can't. But yeah, I feel like these countries are not as great as they say they are. The UK has had a laughable response to COVID. I mean, even the country that I was studying in, a country like Jordan, we had some Brits who were saying, yeah, we're going to return to the UK. We don't trust how Jordan will handle this. And it's hilarious to see Jordan had like 300 deaths, and the UK will probably have a death count that'll like be similar per capita to America, if not worse. And even Americans did that. So there was actually 2 girls that stayed in Jordan from America, and people thought they were crazy. But it looks like America is having the world's at a higher death rate than China. China has quadruple our population, and the virus began there, and their death rate is still lower than our death
as
rate.
an American in the Middle East, you're
Yeah,
guaranteed to have much better healthcare and much
right,
cheaper healthcare if
right,
something happens. If something should happen to an
100%.
American here in
Yeah,
Bahrain, for example, they're going to get immediate healthcare much cheaper,
right,
even if they paid out of pocket than they
right.
would in
Yeah,
the US.
no, exactly. And I
And I
actually
think they wouldn't even need insurance if they were here. They could just pay it out of the salary.
Right, right, exactly. And that's one thing that Americans don't understand is they go abroad and they're shocked. I mean, more well-rounded ones, of course, know now, but they're shocked to hear that there are countries, there's where it's healthcare is affordable. They just expect that it's insane, like everywhere. They're shocked to find out there's countries that don't have crippling race issues or huge endemic systematic problems. But I
But
mean,
this healthcare issue, I think it's one of the things that non-Americans struggle to understand.
really?
When all advanced and even non-advanced, and I don't mean like to sound snobbish here, but you even go to countries in Africa where they have universal health system. It might not be perfect, but it works sometimes.
Wow.
Yeah, I heard recently in Kenya there was a walkout by doctors, and
Re-
they have a voice there, and people get the treatments there, and a lot of it is subsidized by the government. And this also happens here in our
Right,
region, but
yeah.
in America, it's like I don't get this issue, and a lot of people don't get it. It's like, why is it so difficult to get affordable healthcare, quality
Hmm.
healthcare? Why does everything have to be
Right, yeah.
mercantilized or made into a
Exactly,
business?
yeah. The
It
system
blows the mind.
It's set up. So the short answer that I read is that initially healthcare was provided by the church, but then as it got more advanced post World War II, they created insurance companies as a gimmick to get you to sign up to your job. And then what happened was, as another gimmick, these insurance companies started colluding with hospitals to make the bills really high, because that way, no one's actually paying these bills. But if they can charge it high, they can charge the insurance company high, whatever, something like that. But the problem is this continued to this day. Now the insurance companies are declining, and some of these bills, like people post pictures of hospital bill breakdowns on Twitter, where it's like I was charged $60 for an ice cream that I ordered after dinner one night when I was in the hospital, or like they charged me $100 for like a roll of toilet paper or something insane like that. It's just a system issue. There's no reason it should be like someone they did this video where they went to the UK and they asked how much do you think a hospital an ambulance ride costs to the hospital in America, and people were like $100, $50, $250. They were like $10,000, and no one believed it. One guy I knew got hit by a motorcycle, and they called 911, and 911 sent an ambulance. And the ambulance said, "Look, man," or no, he was hit while he was riding his motorcycle, and we were all there with him. We'd showed up to support him, and the ambulance said, "Look, man, if I load you onto this thing, like you're probably gonna have to pay 10 grand because you don't have insurance. Your best bet is just to take whoever has a big car and just flatten the like a SUV, flatten the trunk, and just have all, and we'll just put you on the back to make sure that you don't get hurt getting on, and then just drive him to the hospital, and then someone will unload him." It's like a joke, the ambulance is already there, but just as a formality, it can't take him. It says, imagine in any other country, you call the cops and they say, "Hey, wait, you should solve this crime for yourself because it's too expensive." If we
And this feeds into the tropes about the West here in the Middle East. Like a lot of
Mm,
people have been looking at the riots and demonstrations of riots in America, and they've been talking about, oh, these America talks about democracy and spreading democracy to other areas of the world, other regions of the world. And look what's happening in on their
right,
own
yeah,
soil. And
right.
this healthcare issue too, as people even always say that, they say, oh, in America you can get old and die, alone in your bed, and like as opposed to here in MENA, where presumably you would die, in a circle of family and
That
friends.
no, that's very true. There's
It is true though. Yeah.
it's in Japan as well. Countries where they've been copying the West. It's interesting. In Iran, we're still kind of worshiping the West. We don't have this Occidentalist mindset that everyone wants to be in the West. But in
You
Japan, they
guys are
have
still Gharb
right.
Zadigan.
Yeah, we're still lives. They have there's this company in Japan where they go and collect dead bodies of old people who die alone. And in America, that's becoming increasingly an issue where people literally die alone. There was a good long feature length article about it in some newspaper called "Dying Alone in America." And it was about all these old people who were alone. It was talking about the social disintegration of the country and how all the clubs and committees and public houses and stuff are gone. It's just all capitalized restaurants, and there's no community, there's no church, there's nothing. I was a pizza delivery boy. I used to deliver to people who were like 80 and they were alone and they couldn't cook for themselves, so they would just order pizza and they lived off their social security. And I remember one time this lady said, "Yeah, come inside and give it to me, I'm in the living room." And I was scared. I was a young guy. I don't want to go into a stranger's home alone at night. And my dad said, "No, this is an old lady. Like, we do that all the time for her. She's just old. She doesn't have anyone. Her husband died. She didn't have any kids, and her relatives, she's estranged," because they're all estranged from their relatives. They don't do family reunions or whatever like we do. So they're dying alone. They're only being noticed because of the stench of the dead body, if you can imagine that. The mailman will realize the mail's piling up, and he'll knock on the door and he'll smell something weird and call the police, and they'll
This is
come
the
in.
ultimate result of these individualistic choices.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Not having kids, not keeping up with your family, not
Mm.
having friends. That's the result, is dying alone, and the mailman finding out that you died. And guess what's even sadder than that? They scoop up the rotting body and they bury it, but the state has the funeral because there's no kids, there's no spouse, there's no parent, and there's no relatives. So the state buries you. It's just like the dude working at the graveyard and like a priest that is the chaplain for the graveyard, the default chaplain. Like if you don't have anyone, right? It's
So
incredible.
these anti-natalists boasting, on social media, oh, we're child free. Okay, it's your choice. I mean, nobody's going to force you to have kids, but why? I mean, why should I, uh, why should I encourage you? Why should I give you a pat on the back
Right.
because you're child free?
I think people
It's
who
nothing
make
to be proud of.
these bad decisions need to cheer themselves on, to tell themselves that it's not a bad decision, if that makes sense. So like I remember I saw a post of someone who like was like just got my I don't even know what the word is, but essentially made herself infertile. Just got the surgery done. I think tubes tied.
Sterilize
I
herself.
think sterilization is irreversible, is it not, for
Hmm.
women? Yeah. She was like some
Probably, yeah.
young 20s woman, and it was like I just got myself sterilized, and it had like 10,000 shares. Half of the people were sharing it to support like feminist type people, half were against. And in the comments, she had limited the comments to just her friends, but sharing is public on Facebook sometimes, if but the comments can be limited. So her friends were cheering her on. Some people were saying why, and she was saying, "Well, I don't want to have a kid, so I figured I'd just do it, so I don't have to mess with birth control my whole life." And then people were saying, "Yeah, but you're like 22 years old. Like, what if you want to have a kid when you're 30?" And I don't know, man. I just they're going in a weird direction, and I think they're only going to realize it. We say I was translating a Molavi poem. Actually, it includes this beautiful Persian thing. It says, "Saret be divar mikhore." Your head will hit the wall. Just see. So I think we're hitting the 1 hour mark. Inshallah, we should wrap this one up, and we can continue
I think
talking
so, yeah.
in the next video.
So
So
it was a good talk. So
it
hopefully
was a good talk. Hopefully, we
we'll
don't
pursue
ruffle.
some of these subjects in the
Right.
next podcast.
Hopefully, we don't ruffle too many Western feathers. So maybe they'll take us. Maybe they'll take our criticisms as with a good intention, as opposed to hating. All
Maybe,
right.
you know, they're going to be more cognizant of Occidentalism.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully. All right. Ma salama.
في
Bye
أمان
bye.
الله.